It is week one on the campaign trail this Monday night. From boasting plans to strengthen Canada's sovereignty in Newfoundland and Labrador,
we will build Canada strong,
to promising affordability in Ontario.
This is a tax cut for the waitress, for the welder.
Party leaders are making their pitches across Eastern Canada. Courting Quebec, the complicated task of attracting crucial French-Canadian voters this election, especially for the Bloc. Plus, more deadly Russian airstrikes on Ukraine, even with U.S. attempts at peace talks with the Kremlin. And the end of an era.
I just think it's unfortunate, really.
Hudson's Bay's closing chapter as the former retail giant begins liquidation.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is the first full day of the federal election campaign and party leaders are hitting the ground running. Presenting their platforms in different parts of the country, their pitches so far are centered on Trump, taxes and trade. Elections Canada predicts the 5-week sprint will cost taxpayers $570 million. That's lower than the last election in 2021, but the stakes this time may be higher. As Canadians get set to head to the polls on April 28th, voters are grappling with big questions about the country's future. Our Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the Liberal campaign.
A trip to the airport in Gander, Newfoundland served as a backdrop for Mark Carney to underscore what the Canada-U.S. relationship once was.
President Trump's actions have put that kinship under greater strain today than at any time in our storied history. September 11, 2001.
The Liberal leader lamenting a connection previously built on Canadian generosity personified in Gander after 9/11.
We're in Gander.
With the skies closed, 38 planes were grounded, stranding thousands of Americans who found warm meals in comfy beds.
Welcome to my abode.
In the homes of Gander residents like Beulah Cooper and Diane Davis, who welcomed in complete strangers.
I took 3 ladies over, and one of them teared up. And I asked her if she was okay. She said, yeah, she was tired. So I said, would you like to come to my house for a good night's sleep? And she said, I'd love to.
It was only the right thing to do.
The Liberal leader met the pair, whose stories featured in the musical Come From Away, an example of the Canada-U.S. relationship that Carney wants back.
You would expect, given what these people have done and the long history, you would think respect and friendship for Canada. I'm just looking for respect at this point.
Respect that includes Donald Trump not talking like this.
Canada should be our 51st state. If you look at a map, they drew an artificial line right through it.
Positioning Carney as the best person to take on Trump is the central strategy of the Liberal campaign, but he's yet to actually do so. The pair have not spoken since Carney became PM.
The president is waiting for the outcome of the election and see who has a strong mandate from Canadians.
Things are looking good here.
Yeah.
A campaign spokesperson later clarifying the Canadian embassy in Washington has talked with the Trump team about a call, but Carney's team isn't pushing for one, instead focusing on the election.
I'm available for a call, but we're going to talk on our terms as a sovereign country.
The Liberals will attempt to continue to solidify their strong polling numbers here in Halifax, Nitu, with Carney set to make an announcement Tuesday morning in a city that's firmly trending red.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Halifax. Thanks, Mackenzie. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is kicking things off in the Greater Toronto area. It's a critical region to win in this election. Our chief political correspondent David Akin joins me now. And David, Poilievre has already focused a lot of attention in that area.
Well, Neithu, in the last 3 general elections, the Conservatives have failed to make a breakthrough in the 30 or so ridings that ring Toronto, the so-called 905. In Brampton and Mississauga, 12 seats up for grabs, and the Liberals hold them all. To flip that board, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been campaigning in the region for more than a year. On Monday, there was a quick trip to a Polish deli in Mississauga.
We're cutting the ham and the taxes so that you can bring home the bacon.
Poilievre has focused heavily on winning over what he calls people who work with their hands by visiting dozens of factory floors in the GTA in the last year, and he did so again Monday in the riding of Brampton East. It's the 7th time he's visited Brampton East in the last year. There, he said he would cut income taxes on the first $57,000 or so of taxable income from 15% down to 12.75%. That difference, 2.25 points, represents a relative decrease of about 15%. And that's one that would benefit each and every person who files taxes.
This is a tax cut for the waitress, for the welder, for the barber. This is a tax cut for everybody who has ever got up early in the morning and worked hard to build our country.
Poilievre's candidate in Brampton East says voters are telling him crime is a top priority. Local police say carjackings in the city have nearly doubled from 4,200 in 2021 to 8,300 in 2023. And he, like his leader, blames a Liberal government in Ottawa.
When I came to Canada, Canada was safest country for Canadians. Now I can look at that. Canada is safest country for criminals.
Poilievre will spend one more day in the Greater Toronto Area tomorrow looking for the seats that he must have if he's going to be Prime Minister. Neithu.
Okay, David Akin in Brampton, Ontario. Thanks, David. NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh spent much of the day on the road and out of the public eye. He traveled to Toronto today, a 6-hour journey without any campaign stops along the way. Singh started the day in Quebec with a pledge to build more affordable housing. But gaining ground in that province will be a challenge in itself. Our Touria Izri is traveling with the New Democrats.
Any election is a test of political strength. For the NDP, polls suggest Quebec could be one of their weaknesses.
We need to win here. We want to win here. We care about the people of Quebec. We fought for you, and we've delivered for you.
Leader Jagmeet Singh is trying to do that with promises like this one, a pledge to build 100,000 rent-controlled homes on federal Crown land over the next decade.
You can see the land behind me. 4 years ago, we said this should be used to build affordable homes. Hasn't happened. So the question in this election is, who's going to build homes that you can actually afford? Who's going to fight for you?
The New Democrats have just one seat in Quebec, held by Alexandre Boulris, who insists the NDP is still relevant here.
Conservatives did nothing. The Bloc Québécois delivered nothing to Quebecers. So we delivered pharmacare, anti-scab legislation, and dental care for people, for Quebecers. We are going to continue to fight. And elections matter.
In Montreal, they're fighting the Liberals, a party gaining momentum, and the Bloc Québécois, which won a consequential by-election last September.
We're going to fight hard. We're going to knock as many doors as we can. And I think our message is percolating even more in the neighborhood. We're talking about the fundamentals. We're talking about housing.
I think many New Democrats are very comfortable being the underdog and being written off. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that that's where the party wants to be.
After campaigning in Montreal, Singh held this event in Toronto's West End. The party has no seats in Canada's largest city and is looking to change that. But the NDP leader actually spent the bulk of the day on Highway 401, traveling roughly 6 hours to get here by bus. Neithu?
Touria Izri in Toronto. Thanks, Touria. Quebec's complex political landscape could play a large part in deciding this election. Campaigns in that province usually focus on Quebec's sovereignty, but as Mike Armstrong explains, the American president's rhetoric and threats against Canada appear to be changing that.
Kicking off his campaign officially, Yves-François Blanchet joked Monday that seeing his face on the side of a bus never gets old. This is Blanchet's third campaign as leader of the sovereignist Bloc Québécois, but the first campaign he started by pitching a Buy Canadian law, a response to the U.S. Buy America Act. At an event outside the American consulate in Quebec City, Blanchet said Ottawa has to protect Quebec's economy, and he added Canada's as well.
Et oui, bien sûr, l'économie canadienne.
Now, Blanchet isn't likely to become Captain Canada anytime soon, but he is having to find a new solidarity with the rest of the country because that's where Donald Trump's threats and rhetoric are pushing Quebec voters.
I think the Bloc has to be very careful here because the environment has changed quite dramatically, and this has really favored the Liberals so far.
Mark Carney. Well, Mark Carney has his challenges ahead in Quebec as well. The new Liberal leader doesn't have defined positions on some major issues in Quebec, like secularism and provincial autonomy. And then there's language, specifically the functional but far from fluent French he showed in the Liberal leadership debate.
Nous sommes d'accord avec masse.
The Debates Commission announced Monday the leaders will face off April 16th and 17th, both in Montreal. The first of the two will be in French, putting Carney at a significant disadvantage.
I suspect that Mr. Carney will probably be shielded by his team throughout the campaign, but during the debates there, he will be exposed. So I think those will be important moments for sure.
The Trump effect appears to have wiped out Conservative momentum in Quebec. It's also hurting Quebec's sovereignty movement. A poll by Léger last month put support for separation at just 29%. Neithu, that is the lowest result the company has ever measured.
Okay, Mike Armstrong in Montreal. Thanks, Mike. 5 weeks isn't much time to sway voters. The campaign is the shortest allowable by Canadian law. Every moment counts, but this might be the most critical period for political parties to make their case. Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson joins me now. And Mercedes, how important is the first week of the campaign?
Neithu, there are two critical weeks in any campaign, the first and the last. Of course, mistakes, scandals, or unexpected events can make the weeks in between very consequential. But the first week really is about setting the tone, and it's when voters are paying attention to how candidates are going to define themselves. And so far, the candidates, while different in personality, are focused on the same two themes. Who is the best to take on Donald Trump? And the theme of affordability. Both leaders are focused on retaliatory tariffs, jobs, housing, and in the first 24 hours of the campaign, both announced an income tax cut for the middle class. On the affordability measures, Poilievre wants to go further than Carney, whether it's cutting government programs or the depth of the tax cut. But so far, there are remarkable similarities and symmetry between the announcements. In fact, more similarities than differences, and that tells you where the votes are likely at.
And Mercedes, neither Mark Carney nor Pierre Poilievre have ever won a general election. What will you be watching for in their campaigns?
Well, basically what they're made of, Neithu. We're going to find that out because neither has been tested in a general election before. Mark Carney is brand new to politics. Pierre Poilievre is a lifelong politician, but this is his first campaign as leader. And we don't know how either of them will sustain the trials and tribulations of the campaign trail, which are intense. As for what I'm looking for, Mark Carney will try to brand himself as the challenger, despite the fact that he represents an incumbent government. He's already torn up Trudeau-era policies like the carbon tax to hit the reset button. If you read his speeches, he talks about big change, and it's actually capitalized with a B and C in the writing. Paradoxically, he will also try to maximize his incumbent advantage, sending messages about stability and authority. Pierre Poilievre is hoping to bill himself as well as the challenger and the outsider. He is legitimately coming from the opposition benches and asking for a brand new government, but he's also a lifelong politician. I think you'll see him focus on change as well, and that outsider from the Liberal regime, and you see that in his Canada First slogan that he keeps mentioning. Carney will attack Poilievre as being inexperienced in the real world and Trump-like. Poilievre, meanwhile, will frame Carney as the Justin Trudeau elite, and today we saw Pierre Poilievre take aim at Carney for refusing to take part in a French-language debate for TVA, one of the most watched broadcasters in Quebec. Pierre Poilievre is claiming the Liberal leader is afraid of the now cancelled debate and questioning how Mark Carney could possibly take on Donald Trump if he won't debate Pierre Poilievre in French. Neithu?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Elections Canada gave an update on security measures in place to maintain the integrity of this vote. This is the first federal election since a public inquiry found evidence of interference in 2019 and 2021, but it didn't change the outcome of either election.
There are a range of countries that can have or have an interest in Canada's electoral process. But we've also learned from the Commission that our process is robust. So I am confident that we will deliver a safe election as we have in the past.
Election officials say a public protocol was activated today outlining when to update Canadians about a threat that could undermine a free and fair election. It says staff will also receive regular intelligence briefings from national security agencies and update the public when necessary. And Elections Canada is looking to hire some 250,000 workers and says it will set up polling stations at 119 post-secondary campuses and triple the number of polling stations in Indigenous communities compared to the previous federal election. Negotiation and devastation. Coming up, Russia keeps up its deadly attacks on Ukraine as U.S. and Kremlin officials try to talk peace. U.S. diplomats are in Saudi Arabia pushing for a limited ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Also today, the U.S. president responded to Ukraine's president, saying he believes members of the Trump administration have been influenced by Russia.
Well, probably they have been influenced to get this thing settled because Ukraine wants to see it settled. I think they have to have it settled, and Russia wants to see it settled. And I think if I weren't president, this would never happen.
Trump's comments and the ceasefire talks come at a time of growing pressure. And as Jackson Prosco reports, the Black Sea's shipping lanes are central to the discussions.
The pressure on Ukraine is relentless. Russian airstrikes targeted a residential district in the city of Sumy, injuring at least 74 as Moscow continues its indiscriminate bombardment. A world away in Saudi Arabia, diplomatic pressure is also building. A team of Russian negotiators, personally selected by Vladimir Putin, met with U.S. representatives to find a path to a limited ceasefire. It came the day after talks between the U.S. and Ukraine, which President Volodymyr Zelensky described as very productive.
I think the Russian incentive is to try and change the overall relationship with the U.S. and make the U.S. put the U.S. in a position closer to the Russian position. But I don't think they're interested in ending the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine has said it's willing to accept a U.S. proposal for a full ceasefire. For now, Russia is only offering a limited one, promising to pause attacks on energy infrastructure for 30 days. A favor Ukraine has not returned, launching this drone attack on an oil depot inside Russia.
There is no military solution to this war. It has to end through negotiation. And there's only one leader in the world that's capable of bringing two sides to a table, and that's our president.
The most direct path forward runs through the Black Sea as the two sides push for a deal to secure shipping. All the while, U.S. President Donald Trump continues to yearn for access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals, suggesting a deal could be close. Until then, Ukraine remains in a fight for its very survival. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Gaza, more Israeli airstrikes killed at least 65 people in just 24 hours. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, women, children, and media workers were among those killed, as well as a journalist working for Al Jazeera. Israel has expanded its assault on the enclave nearly a week after it broke the ceasefire. 23andMe files for bankruptcy. Ahead, what concerned customers should know. There's been another night of violent anti-government protests across Turkey. Riot police fired water and tear gas at demonstrators. They're demanding Istanbul's mayor, the main political rival and critic of the Turkish president, be released from jail. The mayor was detained on corruption and terrorism charges Wednesday and was sent to a high-security prison Sunday, the same day he was announced as the main opposition candidate to the president. Since the protests erupted last week, more than 1,300 people have been detained. In South Korea, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has been reinstated as the country's acting president after the Constitutional Court overturned his impeachment. Han originally became the acting leader after former President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached over his martial law declaration in December. The opposition party accused Han of refusing to appoint more justices to the Constitutional Court. That same court now says Han didn't violate any laws and that the impeachment motion was never valid. The DNA testing company 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy protection in the U.S. If its plan is approved by the court, the company will look for qualified buyers. In the interim, it will continue operating with no changes to how customer data is stored, protected, or managed. 23andMe was the first to offer at-home DNA testing kits. It has struggled with sales and had a data breach in 2023 that exposed the personal information of nearly 7 million people. Customers can delete their data and accounts, or they can opt out of allowing their data to be shared for research. The beginning of the end. Next, liquidation sales start at Hudson's Bay. Today marks the start of a sad chapter in the story of Canada's oldest company. Liquidation has started at most Hudson's Bay stores. All but 6 locations will likely close for good by summer. Heidi Petrachik speaks with Canadians looking back on the Bay's history as it faces an uncertain future.
The call of the Canada Goose, perhaps fitting outside one of the Bay stores being liquidated. As shelves inside empty in the countdown towards the end of an era. Liquidations will affect more than 80 stores across the country. Shoppers will make final purchases and remember the bygone days of the department store.
For Canadians, particularly those who lived outside of the bigger cities, it was a place to discover fashion and to discover style.
I took a job here and I was like an elf.
That was Patrick Parnell's first job when he was a teen, and he came back for old time's sake.
Just walking around, you know, reminiscing, and like I said, it's just sad.
We're losing a lot of maybe like face-to-face human interactions, a lot of jobs.
And there's mixed feelings about just Hudson's Bay as a corporation.
The Bay's history in Canada is a troubled one. Founded in 1670, the British gave the company control over all the rivers and streams that flowed into Hudson Bay, ignoring Indigenous rights. What was known as Rupert's Land was later sold to the Canadian government, considered by First Nations a debt far from repaid.
And, you know, it's something that unfinished business that we have to deal with Canada.
Now products bearing the iconic stripes, reminiscent of the blankets once traded for beaver pelts, are being resold online for far more than the purchase price. Evidence the brand could perhaps survive.
It's a lot of nostalgia for the Bay, and there are people that want to probably, you know, hold on to something that reminds them of the times, from the past.
I do think that there is appetite for the Bay in the future.
What that could look like is uncertain. 6 stores in Ontario and Quebec will stay open so far. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada showcases Halifax, Silent Lake Provincial Park, Ontario, and Porcupine Hills near Stavely, Alberta. Keep them coming. Thanks so much for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.